The morning sun rose slowly over the golden fields of Mabira, a quiet village resting at the edge of the African reserve. The air was heavy with mist, and the sound of distant birds filled the silence. Then, suddenly, a scream shattered the calm. A lioness emerged from the tall grass, her body trembling, her golden coat streaked with blood. One of her front paws was twisted unnaturally, caught in a cruel steel snare. She limped forward a few more steps before collapsing near a farmer's hut, her breath shallow and ragged. The villagers froze. Women gathered their children, men reached for sticks and torches. Fear rippled through the air. They had seen lions before, but never this close, never like this. Her eyes were not wild with hunger. They were filled with exhaustion and pain. The snare had bitten deep into her flesh. The metal teeth gleamed under the sun, wet with blood. Each movement sent waves of agony through her body. She tried to rise again, but her strength failed. Her head lowered, and a faint whimper escaped her throat, so soft it silenced the crowd. Among the frightened faces stood Ebo, an aging farmer with gray hair and eyes that had seen too much loss. 2 years earlier he had lost his son to a raging river. Since that day, grief had hollowed his heart. Now, as he looked at the lioness struggling before him, something stirred within him again. Everyone shouted for him to stay back, but Ebo did not move. He saw beyond the fear, beyond the danger. He saw a creature fighting for life, not to take one. He whispered to himself, "She is not here to kill. She is here because she has nowhere else to go." The lioness lifted her head slightly, her gaze locking with his. In that silent exchange, there was no predator, no prey, only two souls that understood pain. Ebo took a slow step forward. The crowd gasped. Someone screamed for him to stop, but he continued walking, each step deliberate, steady. He spoke softly, his tone calm and trembling. "I will not hurt you," he said, though he knew she could not understand his words. Yet something in his voice made her pause. Her breathing slowed, her eyes watching every move he made. She did not growl. She did not strike. Ebo's son ran forward, his voice frantic. "Father, come back. She will attack you." Ebo turned slightly and said, "Bring me the rope and the wire cutter." His son froze. Disbelief painted across his face. "Do it," Ebo insisted. Quickly, the young man obeyed, his hands shaking as he passed the tools. Ebo knelt down slowly, his knees pressing into the damp earth. The scent of blood and dust filled the air. The lioness's paw trembled violently as he reached for the snare. Her muscles tensed, ready to strike if he made one wrong move. He began to pour water gently over the wound. The lioness flinched but stayed still. The sound of water mixed with her uneven breaths. Ebo whispered softly, almost as if speaking to his lost son, "Hold on, you are almost free." His hands worked carefully, the old metal biting deep. With one final push, the wire gave way. The sharp crack of breaking steel echoed through the field. The lioness roared, a sound so powerful it shook the air. The villagers scattered in terror, but Ebo remained where he was, motionless. He lifted his hands, showing he meant no harm. The lioness's body trembled as she rose to her feet. She tested her paw, blood dripping into the soil. Her golden eyes found Ebo again. For a long moment she simply stared at him. Then with slow, deliberate steps, she turned and limped back into the tall grass, disappearing into the wild from where she came. Ebo stood alone in the open field, the broken trap lying beside him. The villagers slowly returned, whispering in disbelief. One of them said softly, "She could have killed you." Ebo looked toward the horizon and replied, No, she only wanted to live. That night, Ebo sat outside his hut under a silent sky. The stars flickered like eyes watching from above. In the distance, he heard a faint roar. It was not a sound of threat, but something deeper of farewell. He smiled faintly and whispered, "You are welcome, my friend." 3 days passed, and life returned to normal. But Ebo could not forget the eyes of the lioness, the silent gratitude he had seen in them. Then, on the fourth night, he heard the goats crying near the fence. The air grew tense again. He lit his lantern and stepped outside. There, beyond the faint glow of light, two eyes glimmered in the darkness. The lioness stood at the edge of the field, her silhouette calm, her head bowed. This time she was not alone. Two small cubs moved timidly behind her. Ebo froze, his heart pounding. The villagers stirred, but he raised his hand, motioning for silence. The lioness stepped closer, slow and measured, her cubs following her tiny paw prints. She stopped near the old well, looking at the bucket of water left beside it. Ebo understood. He stepped back and whispered, "Drink." The lioness lowered her head and drank quietly. Her cubs joined her, their tiny tongues rippling the water's surface. When they finished, she lifted her head again, meeting Ebo's eyes one last time before vanishing into the darkness with her young. Ebo stood there for a long moment, the night breeze brushing against his face. He felt no fear, only peace. The wild had come to his doorstep, not to destroy, but to show gratitude. Days turned into weeks, and the story of Ebo and the lioness spread through nearby villages like wildfire. Some called him brave, others called him foolish, but everyone agreed on one thing. What he had done was something no one else had ever dared to do. Rangers arrived days later, inspecting the field where the snare had been cut. They warned Ebo to be cautious, explaining that lions, once wounded, often returned to the place where they had suffered. But Ebo only smiled. "If she comes back," he said, "I will not fear her." That night, he sat again by the fire, the memory of her eyes still vivid in his mind. The flames flickered against his weathered face as he whispered, "We both lost something, did we not? But we both survived." His voice was calm, filled with understanding that only age and sorrow could bring. A week later, Ebo woke before dawn. The air was cool, and the fields shimmered with dew. When he opened his door, his heart froze. Lying on the ground before him was a small goat untouched, perfectly still, not killed by hunger or rage, but placed with care. Around it were fresh paw prints. He knew immediately who had left it. The lioness had returned, but this time she came not for help, not for food, but to give something back. It was her way of saying what words could never express: gratitude. Ebo knelt beside the gift, his eyes glistening in the early morning light. "You kept your promise," he whispered. In that moment, the distance between man and beast vanished. There was no fear, only a silent bond formed through compassion and respect. Days later, Ebo saw her again, far in the distance, standing on a ridge overlooking the village. Her cubs played beside her, chasing each other through the grass. She watched for a while, then turned away, disappearing into the endless horizon. From that day, no one in Mabira spoke of lions as monsters. The children would trace paw prints in the dirt, saying, "This is where her cubs walked." The fear that once ruled the village was replaced by reverence. People began to see the lions not as enemies, but as guardians of the wild. Ebo often sat near the field where it had all begun, gazing at the broken snare hanging from a tree. It was his reminder that mercy had more power than fear. The wild did not belong to humans, but humans could choose how to live beside it, with hatred or with understanding. He knew that somewhere beyond the hills, the lioness still roamed free, strong and proud. She had healed, and so had he. Her roar, carried by the wind, was no longer a warning. It was a song of life, of survival, and of gratitude. The story of Ebo and the wounded lioness became a legend told by fireside. Travelers who passed through the village would hear the tale and pause, realizing that sometimes the greatest strength is not found in weapons, but in compassion. Because when fear is met with kindness, the wild remembers. If this story touched your heart, give it a moment of reflection. Remember that even in the fiercest creatures, there lies a soul that understands pain, hope, and love. Subscribe to hear more stories of courage, empathy, and the unspoken connection that binds all living beings. Because sometimes the loudest roar in nature is not the sound of power, it is the sound of mercy,